Don't you just love to go grocery shopping, finding a parking place, fighting the crowd, navigating all those aisles, looking for the items on your shopping list, waiting at the checkout line, dealing with the cart afterwards? Well, some people do like grocery shopping, many do. But lately, given the high prices of pretty much everything in the store, coupled with the deteriorating quality of many of the products on sale, coupled with so called shrinkflation, where the package you're buying today is a little smaller than the one you purchased last time, grocery shopping is no fun anymore. Yes, food shopping is part of the Buy Nothing rebellion. In this series about the Buy Nothing movement, I'm the Krabby Curator, and I'm trying to bring some historical perspective to what brought us to where we are today. I'll be painting this picture in very broad strokes because there's so much to the story. This turned into a very long video, and so I have to split it into two parts. The first part is coming right up. Let's begin with a brief historical recap. Our species is estimated to be about 300,000 years old. We started off as nomadic hunter-gatherers based in tribes, clans, extended families, but not basically organized in large urban centers. These were set up in wildly different arrangements depending on what part of the world you were working in. The Inuit living up north lived very differently than people living in desert climates. That's just the way it was. Along the way, our species domesticated the wolf, which became dogs, also horses, donkeys, oxen, and camels. These are the kinds of animals that we found useful, not to mention edible, and helped us to survive. About 12,000 years ago, agriculture made its appearance. This changed everything and was one of the most important advances our species has ever made. We could now stay put and not be so nomadic. We could form little hamlets and villages. We could form areas where we remain year round, growing crops, raising livestock, and doing all the rest. For thousands of years afterwards, people consumed what they could grow and what they could forage for in nearby areas, not only plants, but also livestock and the animals they could still continue to hunt. These villages needed to be largely self-sufficient. Foods were preserved using pickling, fermenting, drying, salting, jerking, smoking, canning, bottling, aging, curing, keeping everything through the winter so we could survive for long periods of time when there was no fresh food available. There was certainly trade, certainly starting with barter. Later on, as we evolved various forms of money, using whatever resource was scarce and valuable, like salt, for example, we could use money to exchange goods among ourselves. So around 7,500 years ago, larger cities and towns began to emerge. The first of these were found in the ancient land of Sumeria in the city of Ur. This is where the legend of Gilgamesh is found, and this dates back about 4,700 years ago. Anyway, Sumeria is considered to be the oldest civilization, where it was an urban area surrounded by stone walls that could be defended. The people who lived outside the walls were the farmers and shepherds and so forth who grew the food that would later be brought in. People needed to be fed, and so farmers would bring their wares to market. Now, these are not like today's farmers markets. By then, some sort of currency was already in use, and so it was possible for the farmers to trade for goods in the city. The city or town, in turn, offered services useful to farmers: blacksmithing, boot making, barrel and pottery making, anything not as easily crafted on the farm. Specialization began to emerge. Guilds would form around specialized skills, preserving that knowledge across generations through a system of apprenticeships. Now, eventually, and we don't know when this all started, you'd see the actual foundation of small shops inside the city or the town area. These were generally owned by a single individual or a single family. Butcher, baker, candlestick maker, and the aforementioned blacksmithing, boot making, barrel and pottery making, all of these trades would be available in small shops. And of course, food would be sold out of small shops too. This small shop pattern, mostly family owned, largely governed how virtually all products are made available to urban dwellers. Thousands of years later, this is still partially the case in many of today's cities. In New York City, for example, you can find all manners of foods in little shops: fishmongers, butcher shops, bakeries, bagel shops, gourmet food shops, wine shops, anything you like can be found shop after shop along the city streets. We can call these the mom and pop stores, and it's a pattern that started a long time ago and is still very much with us, but not to the degree it once was. This is also the case for other cities too. Basically, cities like Berlin, Paris, Tokyo have all preserved the idea of small shops as being where you go to buy the foods that you want. In fact, the small shop model is more commonly found in Europe and Japanese and other Asian cities than it is in the United States. In the US, we have supermarkets. Rather recent development historically, the idea of having all the foods you want under one roof has really only been around for less than 200 years. Up to then, it was mostly mom and pop stores selling all manners of things. It all began with a company called the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, started in 1859. By 1915, it had quickly grown to become the largest grocery store chain in the United States. At some point, they added fresh meat and dairy offerings to the assortment of boxed and canned food items that they were already selling. Because they started off as a tea company, they also sold tea and coffee. Three of the brands of those coffee became famous and popular all over the country. These were 8 o'clock for breakfast, Red Circle for later in the day, and Bocar if you preferred a delicious dark blend. A&P was founded as a chain that featured low prices. That was also part of the model. It was also self-serve. The customer did most of the work. This was a relatively new idea. Back at the butcher shop, for example, the butcher would take your order and prepare the meat for you. It does turn out that the mom and pop model costs the average family more than it would to buy food all under one roof, as was the case for A&P. But being able to save money by buying all your food under one roof became a very, very popular thing. It became tougher for mom and pop stores to compete. Political backlash was inevitable. Antitrust suits were brought and anti-monopolistic laws were passed. The next major chain to appear was IGA, the Independent Grocers Alliance, founded this in 1926. It's 100 years later, and they are still with us, although with a greatly reduced footprint. When I grew up, I remember an IG store in my neighborhood, but it's not there anymore. Now, IGA was interesting because they emphasized the independent chain and enjoy volume pricing, but they did remain independent. Every store could decide its own product mix depending on the unique circumstances of where they were located. IGA is still around, even though only a few dozen stores are still in operation. By the 1930s, more competition began to pick up against A&P and IGA. New chains opened up on the West Coast, since A&P was largely in the northeast part of the United States, and for many decades after, these all-in-one stores simply grew and grew. From the 1930s to the early 1950s, a typical store would be from 10,000 to 18,000 square feet. A&P would be roughly that size or maybe a little smaller. These were self-service supermarkets the way A&P operated. They offered limited product selection and had few specialty departments. There may be a produce department and a butcher department, but that would be about it. Much of the move to giant stores originated when the suburbs began to emerge after World War II. After World War II, there was a gigantic migration from the city centers into the suburbs. The suburbs saw considerable growth in the decades following World War II. In the late 1950s and into the 60s, a typical store would now measure between 15,000 and 30,000 square feet. The growing suburban stores had parking lots, fresh food aisles, bigger produce sections and bigger meat sections, and maybe a few other things not previously seen. Today's modern supermarket runs between 38,000 and 50,000 square feet. A full-service grocery store could easily have a deli section, a bakery, a meat department, a fish department, a pharmacy, an area for prepared foods, and a whole lot else. Then the truly big box stores emerged, sometimes called hypermarkets. These include, of course, Sam's Club, BJ's Discount, and naturally Costco, would also include Walmart supercenters. These are the ones that are the best known. These stores can measure anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000 or more square feet. Walmart supercenters, Kroger Marketplace, Meijer, and a few others are among those people, and of course our old favorite Costco. To get an idea of how much stores have increased in floor space, let's look at an old movie. Let's take a look at Double Indemnity, the 1944 film noir masterpiece directed by Billy Wilder, who went on to make another classic, Sunset Boulevard. In this movie, Fred MacMurray and Gloria Swanson, the two insurance co-conspirators, needed to meet somewhere where they wouldn't be noticed. They decided to meet at a supermarket. Because of timetable and budget constraints, they used an actual Los Angeles supermarket. All they did for the film was to turn the packages sideways so you couldn't see the labels, but they used a real LA supermarket and take a close look at how small and how featureless this store was. But if you look carefully at the lower right, you can see a package of Quaker Oats selling for 10 cents. Tiny. If you like this sort of content, please click the like button and consider subscribing to this channel. There'll be many more of these episodes coming up in the weeks ahead. Back to our story. Now, we're now living in an age where the largest markets have at least 50,000 square feet and up to several times that. Along the way, there have been numerous acquisitions and consolidations. A&P began the practice a long time ago, gobbling up smaller emerging chains at a regional level, becoming a more regional chain occupying most of the Northeast. Today, chains like Kroger's aggressively acquire or attempt to acquire competing chains. In 2024, they attempted to acquire the Albertsons chain, also quite a large one, mostly on the West Coast. This $24.6 billion merger was shot down by the Federal Trade Commission, plus a number of states' attorneys general, who found that this sort of arrangement would absolutely limit competition and therefore they were not allowed to merge. Now, overall, there aren't as many chains of supermarkets as there once was. I can recall growing up perhaps 6 or 7 different supermarkets not far from me when I was growing up. Today, it's more like 2 or 3. Along the way, they got gobbled up by other chains who later got gobbled up by more chains. The big fish eat the medium-sized fish, which eat the small fish, a story as old as the hills. But the news here isn't all that bad, and we'll get to that in a little while. Well, to understand this better, we need to separate out the behaviors and practices of the supermarket chains from the behaviors and practices of the many suppliers and manufacturers that fill those markets. I will primarily concentrate on the behaviors and practices of the supermarket and hopefully make a video about the food manufacturers and producers that supply the stuff that goes into the stores. Now, it's not commonly appreciated that there is a tug of war between the supermarket chains and the companies that supply them with everything on the shelves. Now, you might think that giant food corporations like Kraft Heinz or consumer good corporations like Procter & Gamble could freely dictate terms to the supermarkets on what they can sell and where they have to put it in the stores, but that's not entirely the case. This overlooks one important fact. Shelf space at supermarkets, even in the biggest of stores, is finite, especially the most desirable shelves that are located at eye level. The cheaper stuff is located on the bottom shelf or the tippity top shelf that are harder to get to. There are far more companies wanting a piece of that shelf space than they have available in the supermarket. Shelf space is one of the retailer's scarcest resources and therefore is a source of bargaining power. So, what are the problems with today's markets? Well, it's going to be the usual litany we've been seeing lately elsewhere. Shrinkflation with regards to the products being offered, diminishing quality of the food, especially in things like the produce and meat departments, and most of all, the skyrocketing prices of everything. As I mentioned elsewhere in the earlier talk about fast foods, some of this can be chalked up to the COVID pandemic and the disruptions to the supply chains that it triggered. Also, the high levels of inflation that took place during the first half of the 2020s. But as with fast foods, the prices seem to have been rising faster than what inflation can account for. A lot of this can be attributed to greed, but things like tariffs and natural occurrences also contribute to this. Florida citrus growers have been getting clobbered by a tiny insect called the Asian citrus cyclid, which feeds on citrus tree leaves, causing the plant to contract a bacterial infection known as huanglongbing, because it does come from China, also called citrus greening. This has decimated the Florida citrus industry, and no long-term solution has been found yet. This requires finding new disease-resistant strains, and it will take years before they can be discovered and put into motion on actual citrus groves. Now, another reason for the rise of big box stores like Costco and Sam's Club, not to mention the grocery sections at Walmarts and Targets, is that they generally offer lower prices for most of the items that you want to buy. For the membership hypermarkets like Costco or Sam's, this usually means you need to buy in bulk. Has this ever happened to you? You buy mass quantities of some item and then realize once you get home that you will never use it all up before it spoils. Most people learn pretty quickly what items are simply not worth buying in bulk. Now let's look back at ordinary supermarkets. What's on the shelves at your local supermarket? Most likely, there's an entire aisle devoted to breakfast cereals, an entire aisle devoted to soft drinks, and an entire aisle devoted to snacks. These are high profit margin items, attractive to both supermarkets and producers alike. So basically, they've agreed to expand the coverage of those and make those products available. But these items are not good for you, and as a result, they're among the first things to consider reducing or eliminating from your shopping cart. As people get more and more concerned with their health, it may be possible for those aisles to start shrinking in the future. Maybe that's going to be something we see going forward. There are other problems too, some of them going back a long ways. For example, dishonest weights. I've seen YouTube clips where somebody buys up what they think is a 5 pound bag of potatoes and discovers when they weigh it back home that it came in at 3.8 pounds. Cheating on weights is one of the oldest tricks in the book. It goes back to the beginning of trade. People would find ways of cheating the scales. Back when we had butcher shops, a popular phrase was putting your thumb on the scale. This is how the butcher would rip you off, by putting his thumb on the scale. This sort of dishonesty is ancient, as old as commerce has been happening. There used to be a time when this kind of a scale would be found in most supermarkets. You could check the weight yourself by putting something in there and checking the weight before you put it in your cart. But we don't see those very often anymore now, do we? Expiration dates are another issue. Every once in a while, a state health inspector will discover that a supermarket is selling meats or other perishable foods long after they should have been pulled from the display case. Some stores have been caught pasting new expiration dates over expired old ones. Another issue is sanitation. Some chains, which shall remain nameless, too frequently get cited for health code violations year after year. It's the usual problems: rodents, cockroaches, dirty floors, dirty food preparation areas, and a general lack of concern for proper food handling practices. You probably find out about this from your favorite news sources when an intrepid health inspector very publicly busts the store. It's a great way to get on the evening news. It's also a great way for a chain to damage its reputation, so this is maybe not as big an issue as you might think, and the better stores really do run a tight ship. You might be dealing with a supermarket chain that doesn't care. More likely, you're dealing with an individual store manager who simply just doesn't care. Then there's the matter of the price at the register not agreeing with the price posted on the aisle. A lot of times this is an honest mistake, and they'll very quickly correct it for you. I've never had a problem getting a correction like that made, and no one ever gives me an argument. Now, other stores might give you an argument, but it's never been a problem for me. Now, if you, however, see a pattern emerging where the prices are consistently higher, never lower, at the register than they were in the display case, then you might be picking up on something. If the store management is dishonest, they're hoping you won't find out. But today we have cell phones, and if we suspect shenanigans, we can take photos at the display case and then check the receipt later on to see if they match. If this happens too much, and if you're picking up on a pattern, you can always bring it to the attention of store management, and if that doesn't give you satisfaction, to the attention of your state's attorney general. There's usually a consumer protection division you can bring it to the attention to. And don't get me started on the matter of dynamic pricing. This involves having digital displays instead of paper displays next to each item on the display cases. The idea of these digital price displays is that the new price can be dialed in whenever management wants. You could have a price that starts cheap during the off-peak hours and then goes up in price when the store gets busy. This ability to dial in any price at any time seems pretty greedy and pretty predatory. This seems unfair to the consumer, and some states have actually begun taking steps to outlaw the practice. Remains to be seen where this goes. Wendy's tried that at their drive-thrus where the prices could go up, where a cheeseburger would cost you more at lunchtime than it would cost you, say, at 3 o'clock. The backlash was so severe that they backed off. But don't think for a minute that fast food establishments and supermarkets wouldn't love to be able to put this in place. Now combine this with the idea of having facial recognition at your door, or say a license plate reader going through a drive-thru. A system like this could match your income level because they know all about you, or your license plate because they know all about you, and have it price the products accordingly. If you're affluent, you'd be paying more than somebody who isn't making as much money. I find this to be pretty frightening. We're not there yet, but just for example, Trader Joe's, to its infinite discredit, has started using facial recognition systems in some of their stores, supposedly to control shoplifting. Some states have started to outlaw the practice, and we need to keep an eye on it to see where this is headed. This is the end of part one. Stay tuned for part two, where I get into the rest of the story about supermarket shopping and the Buy Nothing movement.